A self-made billionaire, Marcus Thorne, was a man who believed every person and every object had a price. He possessed a sprawling tech empire, a penthouse that surveyed New York like a god, and a stunning mistress to adorn his arm. At a private high-stakes auction, he planned to purchase a priceless historical artifact for her, a final confirmation of his absolute power. He never anticipated the silent, relentless bidder driving the price into the stratosphere would be his own pregnant wife. And he never guessed that she was using his own money to publicly dismantle the life he thought he controlled. The air in Peter Brown's penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park always smelled of money. Not the crisp, vulgar scent of new bills, but something far more refined, a custom blended fragrance of sandalwood old leather, and a faint, almost imperceptible hint of ozone from the constantly running air purifiers. It was the scent of untouchable, hermetically sealed wealth. And at 42, Peter had more of it than he'd ever dreamed of. His company Nexus Dynamics had revolutionized data logistics, making him a titan of the tech world before his 35th birthday. He had the chiseled jawline of a man who could afford the best personal trainers, and the sharp, predatory eyes of someone who hadn't just climbed the ladder of success, but built the ladder himself, kicking off anyone who got in his way. His greatest acquisition, he often told himself, was his wife, Amelia. She wasn't from his world of cutthroat deals and hostile takeovers. Amelia was an architect, a woman who saw beauty in structure and foundation concepts. Peter applied to balance sheets, not to life. They had met at a charity gala 7 years ago. He was captivated by her serene intelligence, a calm port in the storm of his ambition. She, in turn, was charmed by the raw, untamed energy beneath his polished Savile Row suit. She grounded him. She was, for the first few years, his everything. Now Amelia was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a son. A legacy. Peter should have been ecstatic, and he was in a way. He'd commissioned the most sought-after nursery designer in New York, flown in hand-carved furniture from Italy, and purchased a portfolio of stocks in the baby's name that would make him a millionaire before he could even walk. He was providing. That was his job. But lately, the quiet serenity of his home felt less like a port and more like a cage. Amelia, understandably, was consumed by the pregnancy. Conversations shifted from geopolitical market trends to organic cotton onesies. Her scent, once a delicate Chanel No. 5, was now the faint, milky aroma of prenatal vitamins and cocoa butter. She was nesting, creating a home. Peter, a man who thrived on conquest and acquisition, was starting to feel like a piece of furniture in that home, expensive, valued but ultimately static. And then Isabella Rossi had walked into his life. Isabella was an art consultant, 28 years old, with eyes the color of aged whiskey and a laugh that sounded like champagne bubbles. She was everything Amelia wasn't, spontaneous, fiery, and unabashedly impressed by his wealth. Where Amelia saw the man, Isabella saw the monument. She didn't want to ground him. She wanted to help him soar higher, to stand beside him on the pedestal and bask in the reflected glory. Their affair started, as most do, with a slow burn of stolen glances and business lunches that stretched into late afternoons. It was a cliché, and a part of Peter, the pragmatic CEO, hated himself for it. But another part, the man who'd clawed his way up from nothing, craved the validation she offered. She made him feel like the conqueror again, not just the provider. The auction was Isabella's idea. "It's not just any auction, Peter," she'd purred, tracing the crystal rim of her wine glass at a private table at Per Se. Her red dress was a slash of defiance against the restaurant's muted tones. It's the Sterling Brown Gallery's annual Legacy Collection, invitation only. They're auctioning off the estate of Balthazar Kane, the reclusive shipping magnate. Peter knew the name. Kane was old money, a Rockefeller-level dynasty. His collection was the stuff of legends. The centerpiece. Isabella leaned in her voice, dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is the Chronos of Augustus. It's a one-of-a-kind Patek Philippe grand complication from 1928, commissioned by a Romanov exile. It's never been seen in public. They say it can track celestial movements with perfect accuracy for the next 500 years. It's not a watch, darling. It's a piece of history. It's a statement. Peter felt the familiar thrill the hunter's instinct. He could see it on his wrist, a testament to his power, an object of immense value that only a handful of people in the world could even dream of owning. And, he asked, though he already knew the answer. And, she smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips. It would look perfect on you. Imagine the whispers. Peter Brown, the man who owns time itself. It was a masterful manipulation, playing directly to his ego. It was also the perfect opportunity. Amelia was scheduled to visit her mother in Boston that weekend. A final trip before the baby made travel impossible. I have to go to Chicago, he'd told Amelia that Tuesday, casually over a breakfast of gluten-free toast and avocado he couldn't stand. A last-minute emergency board meeting with the Nexus Midwest branch. Amelia looked up from her copy of What to Expect When You're Expecting. Her gaze was steady, her blue eyes clear and searching. For a moment, Peter felt a pang of guilt so sharp it was like a physical blow. He was looking at the mother of his son, a woman whose only crime was loving him and lying to her face. "Oh, that's sudden," she said, her voice even. "Is everything all right?" "Just a hostile takeover bid on one of our subsidiaries. I need to be there to handle it personally, crush it before it even begins." He used the language of power, the dialect he knew best. It always worked. "Of course," she said, folding a corner of the page. "Just be safe, Peter. Don't let them run you ragged. We need you." "We." The word hung in the air between them. He kissed her forehead, the skin soft and warm. "I'll be back Sunday evening," he promised. "I'll call you every night." The guilt gnawed at him, but the thrill of the hunt, the intoxicating promise of Isabella and the Chronos of Augustus, quickly burned it away. He was Peter Brown. He could manage a business empire, a wife and a mistress. He could have it all. He just needed to keep the worlds from colliding. Amelia Brown was not a fool. She had spent 7 years married to a man whose mind operated like a supercomputer processing angles and outcomes at lightning speed. To survive, and indeed to thrive alongside him, she had developed an almost preternatural attention to detail. She noticed the small things, the minute deviations in the code of their life together. The Chicago business trip was the first major anomaly. Peter hated Chicago in the summer. He loathed the humidity and always complained about the O'Hare traffic. For him to volunteer for a trip was unusual. For it to be a last-minute emergency was even more suspect. Peter Brown did not have emergencies. He created them for other people. The first thread she pulled was a simple one. The night he told her about the trip, she waited until he was asleep, his breathing deep and even. She slipped out of bed and went to his study, a sanctuary of mahogany and brushed steel. His briefcase was on the desk. She didn't need to open it. Her eyes scanned his desk calendar, a sleek digital display. The weekend was marked Blocked Personal, not Nexus Midwest or Chicago Meeting, just personal. It was a small thing, but it was a start. The next day, while her driver, a stoic man named Frank, who had been with her for years, took her to a prenatal yoga class, she made a call. "Hi, Jessica," she said, her voice light and friendly. "It's Amelia Brown." Jessica was Peter's executive assistant, a woman of terrifying efficiency who managed his life with military precision. "Mrs. Brown, how are you? Everything all right?" "Everything's wonderful. Thank you. I was just calling about Peter's trip to Chicago this weekend. I wanted to have a small gift basket from a local chocolatier sent to his hotel just as a little surprise. Could you possibly tell me which hotel the company has booked for him?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Amelia could almost hear the gears turning in Jessica's head. "Chicago, Mrs. Brown?" Jessica asked, a note of carefully manufactured confusion in her voice. "I'm afraid there must be a misunderstanding. Mr. Brown has no company travel scheduled for this weekend." He cleared his calendar completely. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. But her voice remained as smooth as cream. "Oh, you must be right. My mistake. Pregnancy brain. You know how it is, I must have gotten my dates mixed up. Thanks so much, Jessica." She hung up. The lie was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. There was no Chicago. There was no board meeting. There was only a void, a black hole in his schedule, labeled personal. That evening, the sickness that had plagued her first trimester returned with a vengeance. But it had nothing to do with the baby. It was the bitter taste of betrayal. She watched Peter across the dinner table as he talked about the upcoming negotiations, crafting a fiction so detailed, so convincing, that she almost doubted her own discovery. He looked into her eyes, his own filled with a perfect simulation of sincerity, and she realized with a chilling certainty he was very, very good at this. The real breakthrough came from an unlikely source: their finances. Peter had given Amelia full access and power of attorney over their joint accounts years ago. It was a grand gesture of trust, a way of saying, "What's mine is yours." He assumed she never looked that she left the details to their wealth manager, a stuffy man named Mr. Abernathy. But Amelia the architect understood that a strong foundation requires regular inspection. Once a month she would review their statements, not out of suspicion but out of a sense of partnership. Lately she had noticed a pattern: a new credit card, one she didn't recognize, linked to their primary checking account. A platinum Amex with a different billing address. An office suite Peter kept downtown for private meetings. The charges were a road map of his infidelity. Dinners for two at Daniel and Le Bernardin on nights he claimed to be working late. A charge from the Hermès boutique on Madison Avenue for a Birkin 25 bag. A bag she had certainly never received. Hotel charges from the Carlyle, always for a single night midweek. The pain was immense, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. It felt like the floor of her carefully constructed life had fallen away, leaving her suspended over an abyss. She cried for an entire afternoon, her body shaking with sobs that racked her pregnant frame. She cried for the man she thought she had married, for the family she thought they were building, for the son who would be born into a fractured home. But as the sun set, casting long shadows across the pristine white nursery, the grief began to cool, hardening into something else. Something cold and sharp. Resolve. She would not be a victim. She was Amelia Brown. She was the wife, the mother of his heir. She was a partner in this empire, whether he remembered that or not. She would not scream or throw things. That was what he would expect. A hysterical pregnant woman. An emotional liability. No, she would be strategic. She would be silent. She would use the very tools of his world, money, power, and information against him. That night, she logged back into their online banking portal. She saw the new Amex. But she also noticed something else. Something Peter, in his arrogance, had overlooked. In preparation for a large purchase, he had been liquidating some smaller stock holdings and transferring the cash into their main joint checking account. Over the past 2 weeks, nearly $10 million had been moved, sitting there liquid and accessible. He was preparing to buy something big. What was he buying for his mistress? A car, a penthouse. Her mind went back to the misplaced briefcase, to his study. This time she wasn't looking for a calendar. She booted up his personal laptop. It was password protected, of course. But she knew the password. It was Andromeda 7, the name of the galaxy he'd shown her through a telescope on their first anniversary, the 7 for the number of years they'd been together. The irony was a bitter pill. His search history was a revelation. Balthazar Kane Estate, Sterling Brown Gallery Auction, Patek Philippe Kronos of Augustus, exclusive New York auctions. And there it was, a downloaded PDF of the auction catalogue tucked away in a folder labelled Personal Investments. She scrolled through the glossy pages, her eyes scanning past Faberge eggs and Renaissance paintings, until she landed on Lot 47. The Kronos of Augustus. The description was breathless, the estimated price listed simply as priceless. So this was it. He wasn't just buying his mistress a trinket. He was buying her a piece of history, a symbol of ultimate status, using their family's money while lying to his pregnant wife. The sheer audacity of it stole her breath. A plan began to form in Amelia's mind. It was daring, it was audacious, and it was terrifying. It was a plan Peter himself might have conceived to crush a business rival. She would not confront him. She would not stop him. She would let him walk right into the trap he had inadvertently set for himself. First, she called Mr. Abernathy, their wealth manager. Mr. Abernathy, Amelia Brown here. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, Mrs. Brown. A pleasure. How can I help? I'm looking at our main joint checking account, she said, her voice steady and professional. I see a rather large liquid balance. With interest rates where they are, it feels inefficient. I'd like to move $9.5 million into the high-yield escrow account we set up for the baby's trust. Can we do that today? The escrow account was another one of Peter's grand gestures, set up in such a way that funds could be deposited easily, but required a far more complex dual authorization process to be withdrawn. He had given her sole authority to make deposits. He never imagined she'd use it like this. Of course, Mrs. Brown, Abernathy said. An excellent and prudent decision. I'll execute the transfer immediately. It should be cleared by tomorrow morning. Next, she called her mother. Mum, I'm so sorry I have to cancel this weekend. Something's come up with the nursery design, a real emergency. I have to be here to supervise. The lie felt slick and easy on her tongue. She was learning. Finally, she made one last call. Sterling Brown Gallery, how may I direct your call? I'd like to speak to someone about registering to bid at the Legacy Collection auction this Saturday. Amelia said, her voice dropping into a cool, authoritative tone she had learned from her husband. Certainly. May I have your name? The name is Brown. Mrs. Amelia Brown. A moment of silence. The power of that name, her name was immediate. "Of course, Mrs. Brown. One moment, please." She would go to the auction. She wouldn't hide in the shadows. She would sit where everyone could see her, and she would let her husband play out his pathetic little fantasy. Then, when the time was right, she would remind him and everyone else in that room exactly who she was. The sterling brown gallery did not merely occupy its limestone mansion off Fifth Avenue. It inhabited it, a symbiotic fusion of architecture and art that radiated an almost religious reverence for wealth. The air itself felt curated heavy, with the scent of aged wood beeswax polish and the faint floral perfume of the city's most powerful women. As Peter Brown and Isabella Rossi ascended the grand marble staircase, they moved through a canyon of masterpieces. A brooding Rothko canvas hung on one wall, its deep reds seeming to absorb the low golden light. Further on, a Giacometti sculpture, skeletal and stark, cast a long, lonely shadow on the polished floor. The hushed murmur of the guests was a symphony of influence, a blend of English, French, and Russian, where names of corporations were dropped as casually as names of friends. Peter, clad in a Tom Ford tuxedo so perfectly tailored, it felt like a second skin, navigated the room with practiced ease. He was in his element, a predator in a jungle of his own making. On his arm, Isabella was a blaze of emerald silk. Her dress, a daring creation, by a designer so exclusive he only worked by referral, was designed to command attention. She was not just an accessory. She was a statement of Peter's virility and taste, a living trophy that declared he could have whatever and whomever he wanted. "Look at them," she whispered, her voice a low thrum of excitement against his ear, her eyes scanning the crowd with an appraiser's keenness. "That's Dmitry Volkov, the Russian oligarch. They say he bought a private island last month, just to dock his new yacht. And there, talking to the senator, is Cecilia Dupont. Her family practically owns half of Delaware. This is it, Peter. This is the real center of the universe." He smiled, a confident, proprietary smirk. "They're just people, Isabella. People who put their trousers on one leg at a time." It was a lie, of course. They were Titan's gods on a mortal plane, and he had fought tooth and nail to become one of them. Showing her this world, seeing her awed by it, was a potent aphrodisiac. It reaffirmed his own power. They took their seats in the third row. A waiter, moving with ghostly silence, appeared at his elbow to offer champagne. Peter took a flute of Dom Perignon for himself and one for Isabella, who accepted it with a triumphant smile. He was given his bidding paddle, a heavy lacquered black placard with the number 88 embossed in brilliant gold. 8, a number of wealth and prosperity in Asian cultures doubled for maximum effect. He felt a primal surge of confidence. Tonight, he was invincible. He settled back, surveying the room. It was then that he felt it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a prickling on his skin. The primitive instinct of being watched. He scanned the front rows, the Siedl, the faces he knew and the ones he didn't. Nothing. He dismissed it as a flicker of nerves, the adrenaline of the impending hunt for the Chronos. He turned his attention back to Isabella, leaning in to whisper something witty in her ear. As he did, his gaze drifted past her shoulder over the heads of the fourth row and landed on a figure in the fifth. And the world stopped. It wasn't a sudden stop. It was a slow, grinding deceleration, as if reality itself had been plunged into thick tar. The ambient sounds of the room, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the distant city sirens faded into a dull, roaring buzz in his ears. In the fifth row, sitting with an impossible preternatural calm, was Amelia. His mind rebelled, refusing to accept the data his eyes were providing. It was a glitch in the matrix, a waking dream. Amelia was in Boston, or so he believed. She was supposed to be nesting, comparing swatches for the nursery, immersed in a world of domesticity that was 1,000,000 miles away from this temple of avarice. Yet there she was. She wasn't dressed for a confrontation. She wore a simple, sleeveless navy blue gown of heavy silk that fell in elegant folds over her 7-month belly. Her only jewelry was a single strand of pearls he'd given her on their first anniversary a lifetime ago. Her hair was swept back in a classic chignon, revealing the graceful line of her neck. She held a glass of sparkling water, its bubbles catching the light. She looked serene, beautiful, and as terrifyingly out of place as a saint in a casino. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead and the back of his neck, chilling him to the bone. Every muscle in his body tensed. He felt exposed, naked, a spotlight shining on his guilt for the entire world to see. Peter, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. Isabella's voice, sharp with concern, sliced through his paralysis. She followed his petrified gaze. Her eyes, accustomed to scanning for power and influence, initially dismissed the quiet, pregnant woman. Then she registered the laser focus of Peter's stare, and her own gaze sharpened with suspicion. Who is that woman? The lie came automatically, a pathetic reflex from a cornered animal. No one. He croaked his throat suddenly, as dry as desert sand. He tore his eyes away from Amelia, forcing himself to look at Isabella, but his focus wouldn't hold. She's an architect from a charity board I used to sit on. I haven't seen her in years. Isabella's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together. She wasn't a fool. She had clawed her way into this world by reading people with ruthless accuracy. A charity board acquaintance, you look like she just announced she's the IRS. She glanced back at Amelia. She's looking this way. Amelia wasn't looking at them. That was the most terrifying part. She was looking towards the stage, her profile calm and regal. Her presence wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. An unmovable, undeniable truth that had just manifested in the middle of his carefully constructed fantasy. The confidence that had buoyed him moments before now dissolved, leaving him feeling hollowed out. His bravado replaced with a gnawing, sickening dread. How could he do this? How could he raise a paddle to spend millions on a bauble for his mistress, while his pregnant wife sat there, a silent watching monument to his betrayal? The auctioneer. A man named Julian with a mane of silver hair and a voice that dripped with old-world charm, stepped up to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is my distinct honor to preside over the auction of the Balthazar Kane Legacy Collection. The auction began. A delicate Monet landscape, a set of diamond earrings once owned by a duchess, a blood-red 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California Spider. The bids flew millions of dollars exchanged with the flick of a wrist. Peter sat through it all in a daze. He feigned interest, but his entire being was focused on the woman in the 5th row. His mind raced, constructing and discarding scenarios. Had she followed him? Did she hire a PI? Was she here to cause a scene, to stand up and scream at him? But that wasn't Amelia's style. Her silence was her weapon, and it was currently flaying him alive. Peter, are you even paying attention? Isabella hissed, nudging him sharply. A pair of exquisite Art Deco sapphire cufflinks were up for sale. You should get those. A little warm-up. He needed to do something to act normal to quell Isabella's rising suspicion. He gave a jerky nod and lifted his paddle. He won the cufflinks with an aggressive, overwrought bid that was far above their value. The small victory felt hollow. He glanced at Amelia. She hadn't moved. She hadn't even blinked in his direction. Finally, the moment arrived. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," Julian's voice boomed with theatrical reverence, "the crown jewel of the Kane estate, a piece of history, a miracle of micro-engineering, a legend in the world of horology. Lot 47, the one and only Chronos of Augustus." A reverent hush fell over the room. Two attendants, looking like surgeons in their white gloves, carried a glass case to the center of the stage. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was the watch. It wasn't large, but it commanded the stage. Its platinum case shone with a soft lunar glow, and its face was a dizzying, beautiful cosmos of tiny spinning dials, moon phases, and impossibly intricate hands. Commissioned in 1928 by a fleeing Romanov prince, crafted in secret by the masters at Patek Philippe, this grand complication was thought to be a myth for nearly 50 years. Julian narrated. It features a perpetual calendar, a minute repeater, a star chart calibrated to the skies over St. Petersburg, and is said to be accurate for 500 years. It is without exaggeration a singular masterpiece. "We shall open the bidding at $2 million. The bidding was fast and furious. Dmitry Volkov opened at 2. A Silicon Valley billionaire countered with 3. The hedge fund manager Peter despised jumped it to 4. "This is it," Isabella whispered, her hand gripping his arm, her earlier suspicion forgotten in the thrill of the hunt. "Don't let that smug hedge fund bastard get it. Show them who you are." He was Peter Brown. This was his stage. This was his chance to reassert the power that Amelia's presence had leached from him. He would win this watch, and in doing so, win back control. He lifted his golden paddle high. $5 million, he declared, his voice ringing with forced confidence. The room fell silent. The jump was audacious, designed to intimidate. It worked. The hedge fund manager scowled and reluctantly shook his head. Peter felt a small, desperate flicker of triumph. He chanced a glance at Amelia. Still nothing. Her serenity was starting to feel like a mask for something terrifying. $5 million from Paddle 88, Julian announced, his eyes gleaming. A bold bid. Do I hear 6? Silence. Going once, going twice. $6 million. The voice was clear, composed, and came from the back of the room, somewhere in the shadows. Peter couldn't see the bidder. Isabella squeezed his arm tighter. "Don't let them. Fight!" He was in a duel now. His ego, raw and bleeding, demanded satisfaction. $7 million, he barked. $8 million, came the immediate, unhurried reply from the shadows. The price climbed relentlessly. $9 million. $10 million. Peter was bidding on pure blind instinct. The room had become a blur. The only things that existed were his paddle, Isabella's encouraging whispers, and that disembodied voice from the darkness. He was vaguely aware of the astronomical sums he was throwing, vaguely aware that he was pushing the very limit of the liquid cash he had so carefully prepared. This wasn't about a watch anymore. It was about domination. $10.5 million from Paddle 88, Julian said, his voice laced with the thrill of the fight. Do I have 11? 11 million, the voice from the back returned without a flicker of hesitation. This is insane, Isabella breathed, her eyes wide, with a mixture of lust and awe. Finish it, Peter. One last knockout punch. Show him. He took a shaky breath. 12 million. That would be the final word, a number so large it would be an exclamation point on his power. He gathered his resolve, ready to raise paddle 88 one last time and claim his prize. But another paddle went up first. It rose not from the shadows in the back, but from the stillness of the fifth row. It was a simple, white paddle with the number 117 printed in stark black. It was held in the steady, unwavering hand of his wife. The auctioneer, Julian, stopped mid-sentence. His jaw literally dropped for a fraction of a second before his professional training kicked in. He stared, utterly bewildered. I have a new bidder," he stammered, his polished composure finally cracking. "Paddle 117, in the fifth row." The entire room turned as one. The collective gasp was audible. Who was this woman? This pregnant, serene woman who had just entered a bidding war at a level that would bankrupt small countries. Isabella stared, her face a comical mask of disbelief and dawning fury. "What is going on?" she demanded in a frantic hiss. "Who the hell is that? What is she doing?" Peter couldn't answer. He couldn't move. He felt as though the floor had vanished from beneath him, leaving him plummeting into an icy abyss. The air was gone from his lungs. In that moment, as Amelia turned her head slowly to meet his gaze, he saw it all. There was no anger in her eyes, no madness, no hysteria. There was only the cold, clear, devastating light of absolute knowledge. She knew. It wasn't a guess or a suspicion. She knew everything. And this was her response. The world came back into focus with painful clarity. Julian the auctioneer, now looking directly at Amelia, asked, "The bid is 11 million, Madame, your bid." Amelia did not look at Peter. She looked at the stage, her voice as calm and clear as a bell ringing in a winter's dawn. $12 million. If the room had been silent, before it was now a vacuum. The sound of 150 of the world's most powerful people collectively holding their breath was deafening. 12 million. A bid made without aggression, but with the simple finality of a closing door. Julian, recovering, turned his stunned gaze back to Peter. "Sir Paddle 88, the bid is $12 million from your wife. Do you care to counter?" He had used the word. Wife. The confirmation sent a fresh wave of shock and frantic whispers through the gallery. Isabella recoiled from him as if he were diseased. The room, the lights, the faces, they all swam before Peter's eyes. He saw himself a pathetic fool bidding with money he now knew with sickening certainty was no longer his. He saw the escrow account for his son. He saw Mr. Abernathy's prudent advice. He saw the auction catalogue on his laptop. He saw the entire, intricate, beautiful trap. It was a masterpiece of revenge, and he had not only walked into it, he had helped build it. "Sir," the auctioneer prompted again, his voice echoing in the vast, silent chamber of Peter's skull. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His paddle number 88. The symbol of his power and luck felt like it was cast from lead. He could not lift it. He could only sit there, pinned to his seat by the weight of his own stupidity, frozen in the spotlight of his public undoing. Julian looked from Peter's pale, frozen face to Amelia's calm, waiting expression. He needed no more confirmation. He lifted his gavel. "Going once." Peter saw Isabella's face contort from disbelief into pure, white-hot fury. "Going twice." He saw the pity and scorn on the faces of his rivals. "Sold." Julian's voice boomed the crack of his gavel like a gunshot. "For $12 million to paddle number 117. Congratulations, Mrs. Brown." The ride back from the gallery was not silent, in the way that peace is silent. It was a suffocating, pressurized silence, the kind found in the deep ocean just before a submersible's hull implodes. Peter drove the McLaren on instinct alone, his mind a chaotic replay of the last 30 minutes. He saw the slow, graceful lift of Amelia's arm. He heard her voice clear and steady, delivering the $12 million death blow. He felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes turning to him, the collective gaze of his peers, his rivals, his world, as they witnessed his public emasculation. The engine's aggressive roar, usually a symphony of power to his ears, now sounded like a mocking laugh. Beside him, Isabella Rossi was a statue carved from rage. Her posture was ramrod straight, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists in the lap of her emerald silk gown. The diamond necklace he'd bought her seemed to choke her a glittering collar of humiliation. She stared out the window, her jaw so tight, Peter thought he might hear her teeth crack. Finally, as they sped along the FDR Drive, the glittering lights of Manhattan smearing into wet, indifferent streaks on the windshield, she spoke. Her voice was terrifyingly low, stripped of its usual purr, and honed to a razor's edge. So that was her. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. Peter flinched, his hands tightening on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. "Isabella," he began, his voice raspy. "Listen to me." "No, you listen," she hissed, turning to face him. Her whiskey-colored eyes, which had once looked at him with fawning adoration, were now blazing with pure, unadulterated contempt. "Someone you know from a charity board. A casual acquaintance. You stood there and lied to my face while your pregnant wife was sitting 20 feet away, preparing to gut you like a fish. I didn't know she would be there." "How could I possibly have known?" he pleaded, the excuse sounding feeble and pathetic even to himself. "Oh, I don't care what you knew," she shot back, her volume rising. "I care what you did, or rather what you didn't do. You just sat there. You froze. You let her walk all over you, all over us. Do you have any comprehension of the scene you just created? By tomorrow morning, every blog, every society page, every group chat from the Hamptons to Palm Beach will have the story. Peter Brown, the tech titan, brought his little tramp to a high society auction, only to have his pregnant wife show up and financially castrate him with his own money. That's the headline, Peter. And who do you think is the tramp in that story? Every word was a perfectly aimed dart puncturing the fragile remnants of his ego. He had thought of Isabella as a prize, a beautiful accessory to his power. Now she was just another voice in the chorus of his failure, her fury born not of a broken heart, but of a foiled social climbing expedition. "I will fix this," he gritted out the words, tasting like ash. "I'll release a statement. My PR team." She let out a laugh, so sharp and mirthless it made him shudder. "Your PR team. You think you can spin this? You can't. This wasn't a business deal gone wrong. This baul was Shakespearean. You were brought down by the one person you thought you had under your thumb, the quiet little wife at home. God, you probably told me she was boring, didn't you? That she didn't understand your world. Well, she seems to understand your bank account better than you do." He had told her those things. In moments of arrogance fueled by wine and her flattery, he had painted Amelia as a domestic, simple creature, incapable of navigating the complexities of his world. The memory now burned with shame. He pulled the car to a screeching halt in front of her Soho apartment building. The rain had subsided to a miserable drizzle. He couldn't bring himself to look at her, I'll call you tomorrow." He mumbled a desperate, reflexive gesture. "We'll figure this out." Isabella turned her face, a mask of cold finality. She reached up and, with a vicious tug, unclasped the diamond necklace. She held it in her palm for a moment, before dropping it into the center console with a clatter that sounded deafeningly loud. "Don't bother," she said, her voice chillingly calm now that the decision was made. "I was looking for a partner, a king. What I saw tonight was a court jester whose allowance had just been cut off by his mother. You're not powerful, Peter. You're just a man who had a temporary line of credit from his wife. That line has been closed. Permanently." She got out of the car, slamming the door with a resounding thud that echoed his own hollow heart. He didn't watch her go. He just stared at the glittering necklace, a $12,000 reminder of how cheap his grand gestures now seemed. The affair, his thrilling escape from the gilded cage, was over. It hadn't ended in tears or passion, but in a brutal transactional dismissal. He had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. The drive to his own penthouse was a journey through a foreign country he once called home. The familiar landmarks of his success. The soaring Nexus Dynamics Tower, the banks whose executives fawned over him, the luxury storefronts where his name commanded immediate respect, all seemed to mock him. He was a fraud, a king ruling a phantom kingdom. He had believed his power was innate, a product of his own genius and will. He was only now beginning to understand that much of it was propped up by the silent, steady foundation Amelia had provided. A foundation he had been actively trying to shatter. The private elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer. The silence that greeted him was absolute. The custom sandalwood fragrance was gone, replaced by the sterile, neutral scent of cleaning products. It smelled like a hotel, impersonal, transient. Amelia was in the grand living room, seated in a high-backed armchair. She wasn't reading or watching television. She was simply sipping a cup of what looked like chamomile tea held in her hands. Her posture, the picture of regal composure. Her gaze was fixed on the wall above the fireplace. Peter followed her eyes and felt a fresh wave of nausea. The massive commissioned painting, a turbulent, stormy seascape by the artist Gerhard Richter that he had bought her for their 5th anniversary, was gone. All that remained was a stark white wall and the hook it had hung on. He found his voice a dry rasp. "The painting. Where is it?" "In storage," she said, not looking at him. Her voice was devoid of emotion. "I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. You always said it represented your ambition, the chaos you tamed. I see now it was just a storm, and I no longer wish to live inside one." He collapsed onto the vast white sofa opposite her, the plush cushions offering no comfort. He felt like a man on trial awaiting his sentence. "Amelia, please, talk to me. Tell me how you knew. Why you did this." She finally turned her head, her blue eyes meeting his. They were clear, lucid, and held no trace of the woman he thought he knew. The adoring wife was gone. In her place was a CEO, a strategist, a woman he had never truly met. There was no single moment of discovery. "Peter," she began, her tone maddeningly patient, as if explaining a complex problem to a child. "There was just a slow accumulation of data. You're a man of patterns, and your patterns changed. You became careless. You assumed I was too distracted by choosing stroller fabrics to notice a new high-limit American Express card linked to our accounts, the one billed to your private downtown office." She took a sip of her tea, letting the silence stretch. "I saw the charges. Dinners for two at Per Se on nights you were closing a deal. A suite at the Carlyle, a hotel you've always hated for entertaining clients. A $200,000 charge at the Hermès boutique for a Birkin bag I never received. It was a very clear, very expensive story. He wanted to interrupt, to defend, to lie, but his throat was sealed shut. He was mesmerized by her cold, methodical dissection of his deceit. But it wasn't until I saw the large cash transfers that I understood the endgame, she continued. You were liquidating assets, Peter. Our assets. Moving nearly $10 million into the joint checking account. That's not your style. You hate letting cash sit idle. You were preparing for a large, immediate purchase, so I looked at your laptop. The password was still Andromeda 7. Pathetic, isn't it? The name of the galaxy where you told me our love was written in the stars. The casual cruelty of that detail twisted in his gut. I found the auction catalogue, she said. Lot 47, the chronos of Augustus. And it all became clear. You were going to take the money from our son's future, the wealth this family has built, and use it to buy a monument to your affair. A grand gesture for her, paid for by me and our child. You were going to do it while I was supposed to be in Boston, out of sight and out of mind. He could only stare at her, his mind reeling from the sheer brilliance of her counter-move. The money. When I bid, it wasn't there. No, it wasn't, she confirmed with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I called Mr. Abernathy on Wednesday. I told him I was concerned about such a large sum sitting in a low-yield account. I instructed him to move $9.5 million of it into the baby's escrow trust. A perfectly logical, prudent financial decision. You gave me that power, Peter. You signed the papers yourself. You thought it was a gesture of trust. You never imagined it could be used as a weapon. The full, horrifying scope of his defeat washed over him. She hadn't just outsmarted him. She had used his own tools, his own arrogance, his own gestures as the instruments of his humiliation. To do that in public, Amelia, he whispered, his voice cracking with the agony of his shredded pride. In front of everyone. It was a public execution. She placed her teacup down on its saucer with a delicate click. An execution, she mused, her voice still unnervingly calm. No, Peter. It was a hostile takeover bid. You and your associate were attempting to acquire a valuable asset using funds improperly leveraged from the parent company. I, as the majority shareholder and acting CEO of this family, simply blocked the acquisition and reallocated the funds. It was just business. You, of all people, should understand that. She stood, then a slow, deliberate movement. She was the embodiment of power, and it had nothing to do with money. It was the power of absolute moral certainty. My lawyer will be in touch with yours on Monday morning to begin divorce proceedings. She stated the words, landing like blows. Your clothes and personal effects have been packed by the staff. They are in the guest suite. I would like you to be gone from this apartment within the hour. The locks will be changed by noon tomorrow. Divorce. The word was an obscenity. No, Amelia, you can't. I'll do anything. I'll end it with Isabella. It's already over. Think about our son, he pleaded, finally, finding his voice a desperate, pathetic whine. She walked towards him, stopping just a few feet away. For the first time, he saw a flicker of the old Amelia, a deep, profound sadness in her eyes. But it was alloyed with an unbreakable core of steel. I am thinking of our son Peter, she said, her voice softening slightly, which only made her words more devastating. I am thinking of him every single minute. And I have decided that he will not be raised in a home where deceit is the currency and respect is an afterthought. He will not be raised by a father who believes his mother is a fool. He will be raised by a woman who took back her power. What example you choose to set from a distance, well, that will be up to you. With that, she turned and walked out of the living room, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor before being swallowed by the vast, cavernous silence of the home he had built but never truly inhabited. Peter Brown remained on the sofa, a king in a kingdom of one, surrounded by the opulent trappings of a life that was no longer his. He hadn't just lost a watch or a mistress. He had lost the entire war, a war he never even knew he was fighting. And the victor had just left the room. In the end, Peter Brown learned the hardest lesson of his life in that silent penthouse. Power isn't just about the money you have. It's about the respect you command and the foundations you build. He had mistaken Amelia's quiet love for weakness, her focus on their family, for a lack of ambition. He saw her as an asset, and she reminded him she was a partner, and a formidable one at that. The story of Peter and Amelia isn't just about a cheating husband getting his comeuppance. It's a powerful reminder that true strength often lies not in the loudest voice in the room, but in the quietest, most observant mind. It's a testament to the fact that you should never ever underestimate the person who knows your secrets. What did you think of Amelia's incredible power move? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of drama and poetic justice, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good story, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas.